Time is 6 p.m. Before we begin, council and commissioners, please put away cell phones. If you have personal business during the meeting, please move for a recess. As a reminder to all attendees, this meeting is being streamed live. The camera is located directly in the back of the council chambers above the clock. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Johnson?
Here.
Councilmember Crafton?
Here.
Councilmember Velock?
Here.
Councilmember Rubio?
Here.
You do have a quorum, Madam Mayor. Councilmembers Sullivan, Leonard, and Graham are absent and excused unless there's objection from the body. Councilmember Johnson is participating telephonically. Crafton, Velock, and Rubio are here in person. Now on to the Planning Commission. I'm just going to start with Commissioner Cottle is absent and excused unless objection is raised from the body. Commissioner Sajel?
Here.
Commissioner Seals?
Here.
Commissioner Stafford?
Here.
Okay, Madam Mayor, Commissioner Sage, L, and Seals are present with us in chambers. Stafford is participating telephonically. Again, Ms. Cottle is absent and excused, and Planning Commission seat A is vacant. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Melvin Sajel, would you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. Are there changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. We are on to public participation. Persons to be heard. It's a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. We have no one signed up. Would anyone in the audience like to address the council at this time?
I have a question. Will there be time at the end of the meeting after everything goes on? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, seeing no one, we are on to unfinished business. Madam Clerk, please read the item by title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a rewrite of Wasilla Municipal Code Title 16, which is our land development code. Council and Commission will be in committee of the whole, and this was continued from January 31st, 2024.
Is there a motion to enter the committee of the whole?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Crafton.
I move that we enter Committee of the Whole to discuss the Title 16 Land Development rewrite.
Is there a second?
Rubio seconds.
It's been moved by Councilmember Crafton and seconded by Councilmember Rubio to enter the committee of the whole. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none. We are now in the committee of the whole. The time is 6:04 p.m. Ms. Holly, you're up.
Okay, here we go. Hear me? Is this
No.
screen? I feel like, oh, right.
There you go.
There you
Oh,
go.
are these new ones? I feel like it's fancier. Okay. All right, today is going to be very fun. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about policies and concepts. This will be one of two of our last, so segment 4 will also have a lot of policy discussion. After that, what you're going to get is a draft ordinance that has the organization, formatting, and all of those comments and thoughts that have culminated from these 4 segments integrated into it, at which point we will start working on tone, user-friendly organization, making sure that the council and the commission can navigate the entire title easily and harmoniously, because that suggests that the public will be able to do so as well. So that's just sort of our overview of our blueprint of where we're going. So I'll say that before I delve into the PowerPoint. So today we are, hold on, I'm going to, for those of you on the phone, I am just trying to remember how to work the remote. Is there a PowerPoint on this? All right, I have success, I think. There we go. So we're on this, the first slide talking about the basic overview for segment 3. So today we're focusing on 2 important areas of land use management that shape the city of Wasilla, as you all know, based on the hundreds of pages of resources that were included in your packet. I'm guessing that was a little bit frustrating, but part of the reason for that was to make sure you could see what the policy reform documents and the kind of thoughts of other communities were right now in these particular playing fields. And that might spark some thoughts and ideas regarding options. And so that is why you have such a very thick packet in these particular arenas. The first area we're going to be talking about is landscaping. We're going to review the proposed Chapter 1633 and talk a little bit about that. But right now, Chapter 1633, as it was proposed, is essentially the City of Soldotna's landscaping code. It does not have a lot of revisions, and there's certainly some changes that we'll need to make for cleanup purposes and presentation purposes. But what we wanted you to see was the difference between an emphasis on native vegetation and really, I would say, Alaska-based landscaping, as opposed to a heavier micro regulation approach that gets into a lot of very technical restrictions and limitations, but that doesn't have the type of flexibility for our particular Arctic environment. We're going to discuss other landscaping approaches. There are a lot of different ways to approach landscaping, and so we're going to talk about what that looks like. The next topic we're going to talk about, and the only other topic, so we're going to keep it pretty pointed, is parking. Parking, we made no changes to parking because we really needed to discuss with both bodies what kind of changes we're looking for. There are a lot of very innovative options out there. The one we're going to talk most about today is rolling back or eliminating parking requirements. These are steps that communities within the state of Alaska are taking and the communities outside have taken. And so we're going to talk about whether or not those would really work for Wasilla, or what our thoughts are, or what your thoughts are on tackling that now. But we're also going to talk about how the comp plan plays into your considerations on what direction you want to go, if any, with parking and landscaping. All right, so I can't read the slide number because I forgot my glasses, but I believe I'm on slide 3. Okay, slide 3. And we do have,
Because it's on the screen, the left.
I'll I don't want to deviate from my pile of resources. Okay, so when we're looking into landscaping, landscaping requires careful consideration of the reasons for landscaping and the city's goals before any limitations and requirements are adopted, or at least that is my professional opinion. If you are not deliberate about your laws are not deliberate, which makes them harder to understand and the clarity is lost. So we are going to work together to try to create that very deliberate lawmaking so that your provisions reflect your actual goals and objectives, and that we incorporate, and I think this is the most important part, that we incorporate in the landscaping code that intent and purpose. And generally speaking, I'm not a huge purpose fan. I don't like to see them riddled throughout codes because code is law. And so if you have a provision that says we want a pretty community, a person would be struggling to figure out how to impose that law, right? So, however, in the world of land use, when we're looking at flexibility, having purpose statements very clearly stated in your code, and then having provisions that allow flexibility to do things maybe slightly differently than the parameters in the code, so long as they meet that purpose, then that becomes a law, that becomes a tool. and it allows flexibility in areas that need it. And I would offer that communities like Wasilla and really any Alaskan community needs flexibility because we live in a very unique, ever-changing, somewhat volatile environment. So, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to identify your objectives as individual members. You know, what you really want to see. What do you think the purpose of landscaping is? And later we'll talk about the comp plan and that process, and also what the comp plan currently says as an effect. But the first step really is to think about why. Why do we regulate landscaping? What are we trying to do in Wasilla specifically? So I'd like to, Mayor, if you could help me just sort of orchestrate a go around the room sort of thing, or however you want to do that. But I want to gather those comments from all of you.
Okay. We'll start with Melvin Sagel.
You just love putting me on the spot.
I do.
So we want to discuss why we need landscaping, or
Yeah, I mean, if I came to you today and said, I think we should remove landscaping. We don't need it. Let's just not do it. Let's just no landscaping. I imagine that a lot of you would say, well, wait a minute. We may actually need landscaping because, and that's really what I'm looking for. What your becauses would be.
well, I think we do need it because number one, I think it makes the city and the buildings look presentable. I think our current regulation is a bit difficult to understand, at least from me. I mean, only thing I know about landscaping is cutting my grass. And I look in there and they're talking about deciduous trees and shrubs. I had to look that up. I didn't even know what that meant. So I think it has to be a little more flexible and not as complicated, and also has to be efficient in terms of how much it costs, because especially for smaller businesses who don't have that kind of money. I mean, I know that talks about landscape architects and so forth, and I mean, just when you say architect, I just think money. And I think also uniformity, so you don't have one area, all laid out and then somebody else just has a bunch of dirt and rocks. So I think it has to kind of have some kind of uniformity to it.
All right, perfect. And one thing that I think that you did, let's take this approach because it's more efficient time-wise. So if you guys can state your sort of why we landscape, why you think we should landscape, what you're hoping to get out of that, and then some of the concerns or risks. And you did that when you stated the costs. If you have exorbitant costs of landscaping, that's a concern, and making sure people can understand it. So I think that we kind of got both questions addressed. So let's do that. I think that's okay.
Mr. Stafford.
Yes, thank you. Very similar to Commissioner Sagel, we need to have some landscaping codes. Just the criticism of Wasilla from those that don't live here is we're one lone strip mall, and for those of us that travel outside the Parks Highway corridor, we understand we're more than that. But I think the landscaping helps just the public's perception of our city. But of course, we don't want to make it so onerous that you need a degree in landscaping to get your landscaping permit. And so while we need some standards and we need some basic minimum requirements, we also need to avoid it becoming a barrier to, like Commissioner Sagel said, I'm a small business owner, I want to build a building, and now I've got to hire landscape architects or engineers, or, it needs to be something that's within my grasp, or I'm just going to give up and go somewhere else.
Okay. Mr. Seals.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. My feel for landscaping is, yes, we should have some landscaping. It should be uniform, but bare minimum. But the biggest thing, I'd like to see that the landscaping materials are purchased locally. Quite a few of these landscaping projects that have been done over the years, you got to ship the plants in from outside, and that's not doing our local growers. I know at least here in the valley, we have several local growers of Alaska plants and trees. And I think if we use a bare minimum uniform standard and we use local plants and trees, I think it will benefit what everybody's looking for here.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you. I think we definitely need some standards. One only has to drive up Wasilla Fishhook Road and see the development of these multiple houses with no landscaping to realize that that's not the kind of community that we need. But we also need to, look at the economics of it, and we also need to consider the usability of it for the developers, so we don't need to have a architect or a lawyer read the code. Thank you.
Ms. Velock?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page. I agree that we need landscaping. We want our city to look nice. We want it to look like a city when you drive through. But I remember being on the Planning Commission where we would have businesses like in an industrial area who the landscaping criteria was, they had to hire an architect and they had to have so many bushes and this and that and this in an industrial area where he wanted to put white rock, which I thought, man, that'll look nice right there. And that seems reasonable. And we were instructed to turn him down. No, he had to stick to these stringent, and I'm like, so I think we need to be reasonable. We want it to look nice. In industrial, I don't know why we'd be so, I don't know why we'd care that much when, they're parking equipment and this and that they have so many bushes and brushes and whatever. But, so yeah, we need, we need some landscaping rules. We want it to look nice. We want to be reasonable. We don't want it to be difficult. I agree with Commissioner Seals that, it should involve local vegetation, stuff that people can get easily and not cost them an arm and a leg because I have had businesses say, I'm not buying property in the city of Wasilla. You guys make it too difficult. So let's make it easy. Let's make it can look nice, but be reasonable and just help the local aspect of it. Thank you.
Ms. Rubio?
Thank you. So I do agree we need landscaping. I think everybody has great points, and I think we're all on the same page. Remember back when I said my third grader needed to be able to read it and understand it, right? I'm a business owner of a couple businesses in the city, and I'm going to tell you that it was very hard to get everything that you needed for the landscaping, still struggling for one of them. What I want to see is that the landscaping plan is very bare minimum and using, like they said, local greenhouses, local growers, natural vegetation that is grown in Alaska. Because why? That is low maintenance, guys. So yeah, it might look beautiful when they first landscape and we can drive around this town and it looks great for a moment. Give it 3 months. It needs maintenance, right? Give it a year. Give it 2 years. Nobody's out there checking maintenance. So I just want our town to look beautiful for those 3, maybe 4 months that we get, right, guys? The other half of that landscaping, you have to remember, is snow, right? I mean, that's about 3/4 of it. So you got to realize that when you are plowing, when you are storing snow, that you don't have those landscaping islands and got to have, curbs over here and this and that. It's easier, plain and simple square box to plow. And it is really nice of that landscaping if you have rocks and you have barriers already, right? And so it's one of those things that it actually works. It should work with the snow removal with our maintenance plan. So just, I think if we can kind of coordinate that and really get them on the same page, I think our town's gonna look beautiful.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's kind of nice going at the end here because I don't have to say as many things. I think the goal of landscaping is to prevent a town or business or location from becoming a concrete wasteland, or asphalt in our case. We don't have as much concrete. A couple comments were about doing the bare minimum. I think if we set the bar too low, unfortunately, sometimes we see businesses, I mean, again, their goal is to make money, so they tend to do the bare minimum. So yes, we want to create a minimum standard that still looks good, but doesn't set the bar so low that it doesn't look good. There's a fine dance between those two. I really like some of the ideas of giving native vegetation credit, since, hey, we're not clear cutting this lot, we're leaving some of this property intact, so let's give this person credit for having some landscaping already done. So I think there's a good balance of what's already existing and not making the business owner do so much that it becomes a burden, as already stated with the architects, with how difficult the code is to read. I think it's a step in the right direction. I mean, just going off the fact of what I've already read here, I like what I'm seeing so far. And again, let's not create a standard so low that anybody can achieve it. We want it at least to be somewhat decent looking, again, with snow plowing keeping in mind. I think that's what I'd have to say about it, if that answers your question.
I agree that we do need some landscaping, because we have went from, my quote is, we've gone from podunk to urban. And to be able to attract businesses, because we live on sales tax, and we need to make our city look welcoming and friendly. But I don't think that we need islands in the middle of a parking lot. I think that when you think about landscaping and you think about snow plowing, where you're gonna store the snow, and that snow's got salt in it. So whatever bushes you're covering up, they'll be dead come breakup. So I think all that has to be taken into consideration, and I don't believe it has been before. We need to work with the businesses, because they don't need to, if you're gonna put up a building for $500,000 and your landscaping's gonna be $250,000, are they gonna do that? No. So I think we have to consider how much and whatever. There's one business here paid $800 for a tree. And so when they plow snow, he stands in front of it. Don't hit my tree, and I don't blame him. You know, that's just, to me, that's just crazy. Because I cleared every tree on the lot my house is built on, and I planted grass, and I love it. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents. Okay, Holly.
Okay, so that was very helpful, and the great news is, I don't think we're gonna have many changes to what we proposed to you for landscaping. I mean, there will be a lot of changes based on organization, because I really do wanna see the criteria broken out by, for example, parking lot, landscaping standards currently are just sort of embedded in a laundry list of everything landscape, and I wanna see those sections where a developer, a property owner can very quickly look and say, oh, that's what I need to do for that, and that the department can very easily reference when they're responding to questions. So you'll see those types of changes, but everybody is really aligned. I would say that one thing we have not thought, or I did not think about when reviewing Soldotna's provisions, was the snow removal piece. So that's actually the snow removal and how that plays into what we're proposing. That will be something that I'll work with Planning and Public Works to really think about that, because I don't see that as a deliberate consideration in our current landscaping provisions. But I also think that so what Soldotna did that I really liked, and so it does somewhat address that, but this is what they did, and this is why we selected them as sort of the base where we're going to start. They have landscaping. They require trees, they require shrubs, they require maintenance. They also have provisions that go to the health of the vegetation, but it's very much grounded in the types of landscaping materials that you find in the state of Alaska. And a great example of that is the use of rock alongside, say, mulch, right? So in our current code, we have a definition for mulch, and the ground coverings that we're looking at are very standard for landscape plants outside Alaska. You see them far more often in the, sort of in the from Texas to Florida realm. Like you see a lot, and actually you don't see a lot of them in places that have their own set of unique weather patterns. So what that tells us is we're looking at, which was a good idea, I think, to grab a base from vegetation that you find throughout the country, or Alaska. And so a lot of that doesn't make sense. And rock actually does make a lot of sense in certain arenas and in response to certain objectives. So that is one thing we looked at. We looked at the requirements that we use is hardy, and that it is that it meets the standards for an Arctic environment that is specified as the environment that Alaska falls into. So there's actually, there's a determination that kind of classifies Alaska along with some of its, climate sisters across the world. And so it looks at those climates, it looks at what grows, it looks at what grows well, and what requires maintenance and what requires less maintenance. And we're just incorporating those in so that all of those types of vegetation, all of that vegetation is an option. It also, because it uses these more general terms, trying to get to a certain appearance and a certain sort of rational use, it has a lot of flexibility, because it doesn't just say you have to have X material in Y place. It talks about why you have to have a material that behaves like X in a certain place. And so that shift is going to be, I think, very helpful for the department, because they can look to, so what you'll see so I have a draft you have not seen where I've been working on adding the purpose statement to each of the provisions, but I didn't want to finalize that until we had this session, because if you were looking for a different direction or preserving some of the more technical provisions, then I wouldn't take you guys there. But we're going to go there. We're going to go there at segment 5. We're going to add a provision where we're dealing with the whole code, right? So when we're going through that process, what you'll see is, I'll give you an example. So if one of the areas that have landscape standards is parking lots, so you will see a new section that says parking lot landscaping standards. Section A of that is your purpose, and it's going to state, we have landscaping in parking lots because, and the language is in the current provision, so we can read it, or I'll just, basically it talks about the need not only to beautify a parking lot and add a uniformity, but also, and this is important, there are environmental components of landscaping. It absorbs water. It stops runoff, right? It plays a real role in mitigating environmental concerns that stem from our weather and from slope and from all of the things that we create when we develop. And so my understanding of that is very minimal, because I am a lawyer, and so we have to make sure that we do not inadvertently remove that conversation and the knowledge base that led to a lot of those landscaping standards. And by adding provisions with the flexibility, at least at this stage, and that have that purpose statement, it allows knowledgeable staff to inform that conversation. And it allows, perhaps even more importantly, knowledgeable owners and developers to participate in that conversation, because it talks about what they need to do. So if I'm a developer, I don't want my property to create a hazard for the property down the street with the water runoff or whatever it might be, because under the law, I'm liable for that. So I don't want my property to do that, because most likely, especially developers in a commercial arena, are very aware of those liabilities and the potential harm. So it puts everybody in a position to work within the purpose statement to get a plan that's going to work for them. So that's where, and so unless somebody has concerns about taking that approach, that's sort of where we're headed. And based on what I heard, I think we're on the same page. Seeming a little too easy. I don't know. Yes, good. All right, so that's where we're going. And the other thing with landscaping I wanted to talk to you about is the guarantee. So currently under the code, you have a guarantee and a construction bond process for several land use areas, but the one that I preserved for discussion is in landscaping. However, when we did change, the current guarantee does not have a lot of provisions and protections and certainty. So while it requires that a bond in essence be, or a payment of an estimated cost of the landscaping be deposited or held by the city, it doesn't provide a very clear process for identifying when the landscaping plan has complied with the requirements and releasing that bond based on that compliance. It doesn't have the issuance of, for example, a notice of substantial completion. So if somebody who does have, or a notice of non-compliance. So those two things really matter, because if you think about it, if you're developing a property and you've paid this bond, but there's no way to flag that they have either not complied or to make sure that their bond is released, then they could subdivide and sell off parcels, and those parcels could be purchased without any indication or knowledge that they weren't compliant with landscaping. And so that's one problem. Another problem is a developer thought they were compliant, moved forward, and then you could have years later where they are wondering where their released bond is, and they don't have a very clear written memorialization of the communications they had with the city. So they might be saying, well, no, I went to the planning department and they said it was fine. And the planning department there might be a brand new person there who's like, well, why would they say that? It's not fine. And you have no record. And that creates frustration, and that creates a feeling of inequity. So what we've done is now we've added language where the guarantee is still there if you want to keep the guarantee. This is the one arena we did keep it in, which means then once they comply, a notice of compliance is issued, and within a certain period of time, that bond is released. And similarly, if they don't comply, a notice of non-compliance is issued and recorded. And in order for that to be removed, it has to be addressed. And so this is provides protections on both sides. But the other option is just to not have a guarantee, is to use enforcement rather than a bond process, which is also acceptable. I mean, you can do, both are legally appropriate and done frequently. So this one is a policy question. So I think, Mayor, this would be another one I would love to hear some discussion on.
Okay, Ian, I'm gonna start with you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And this, just so to make sure I'm looking at the right spot that this is referencing, this is page 86 of 294, is the only spot when I was reading that I found the guarantee discussed.
Yeah, it should be, it's only in one
That was the only spot.
section. So, it's been removed from everything else. So let me just make sure, I'm gonna go to that page, so
Let's make sure we're all talking about the same
Yeah.
spot there.
because I think,
It's section 8 and then number 1.
did you say page 86?
86 of 294, or 84 of 292, depending on which one you're looking at.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
That would be. I'm gonna go to the original copy. I'm not finding at least what I am talking about, I'm not finding there. So I'm just gonna go to and I'll give you guys the page reference in our proposed changes, because I think you're looking in the red line, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so the red line is, so just so you know, when we create the red line, we use a compare feature in the database because the changes are too substantial to just redline them as you go. And so they're not always they're great to look at what has changed as an overall, but I find them very difficult to navigate. So we provide them so you have them, but a lot of times it'll be easier to go to just the proposed language because it'll be cleaner. To the extent that helps, and mainly too, because they delete, the way the compare works, it'll like delete an entire 10 pages and then add the new language, at the back or whatever. You can't really choose where it decides to add the red line. So just,
She's looking still, but the page that I found it on that I figured she was questioning was this one right here.
so it's on page 47. Is that the same as I'm sure it's the same language, but I have will be section 163380, but in theory, so you can write that on your paper if you want to. That's, if you keep it, that's where it will go. But on page 47 of 292, so that means page,
Oh, you said 47?
47?
Page 47 of 292, but I think you said you have a 292.
That's okay. I know how to look at each one.
49 of the packet.
Yep,
if I
it's the
may.
same one we're discussing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, good, yes,
We're
that
good.
is the guarantee provision.
thank you, Mayor. So my thought when I was reading this and looking at it, I do like the idea of having a guarantee only if it's a certain dollar amount. That way, we don't end up with a situation where somebody that's building a single family house, because it kind of falls right in line here, ends up needing a guarantee. Like, I think it's a dollar amount of what ends up needing to be lands, or the overall project cost, I guess, would be more the way to look at it. But I'm hesitant on saying yes, also because I don't want it to be too confusing where somebody's having to wonder, what project amount are we talking about? Are we talking about the entire building project? Are we talking about what's gonna end up needing to be spent in landscaping? So I like the idea of it, as long as it doesn't complicate the process further. If it can be simplified in a manner that makes sense to the average person, and then yes. But the way it reads right now, I was actually a little still confused on how it worked out. That'd be my thought on it right now.
Okay.
Ms. Rubio,
Thank you, madam. With both of them, the red line and the normal one, we have bonds on previous businesses, right? I mean, I'm not a huge fan of that. To simplify it, we need to simplify it. I'm not sure what that looks like on which way we need to go with that. Putting a dollar amount on it, I'm not 100% sure that's the way to go either. I don't know. I really don't know yet.
And so this one.
I don't like it. I don't like it, but I don't know the direction really I want to go.
Well, and this brings up a good point too, because when we're talking about guarantees, so the way that it's written right now, it's the estimated value of the landscaping, right? So the amount is based on the estimated value of the landscaping, and that's, so if we do a certain amount, so legally speaking, we want to make sure that our number is tied to the estimated cost of the landscaping. I think we have a case that, that puts us sort of squarely in that realm. We can't ask for more. And we can't have an arbitrary number. But I think when you say, so the first thing I just want to clarify, when you say you want a set number, but you said for each project, you mean, what do you mean you want a number in the code? Or you just want,
May I respond?
I just want to make sure I understand that question, and then
I guess it'd be more like a percentage then at that point, because it's in reference to that project, not a blanket amount for every single project. It would be, and it sounds like Eric's got something to chime in. I'm kind of curious to hear what he has to say, but it would be whatever the project is, it ends up being a percentage of that project, which I believe is how our current one is written, if I understood it correctly. Not that it would be a set amount no matter what your project is, if that makes sense.
yes. And so I think having a set, so what, as far as the legal merits of a guarantee, having a set amount is what we would need to do, and it would be based on the project. This one is based on the value of the project, so that might be too high. So we may be wanting to talk about a lower percentage of the value of the project. The one thing I will say, and then Eric, I'll turn to Eric and let him. Hopefully, you have something to help clarify this. But I think that the other problem is when we're talking about guaranteeing bonds, we can't get too simple, because we're requiring people to take on debt or a credit, and then we are managing that. And so right now we have a very complex system identifying what and how qualifies to meet that standard, but we're not going, if you're going to keep a guarantee, we're going to have to be good stewards of the money that we are holding. And we are going to have to make sure we have proper notification and release and recording. And so all of those pieces, and we'll work to get the language tight, but simplicity does not necessarily accompany guarantees very easily. Okay.
Okay, Eric.
Thank you. So what I want to chime in on was, typically we don't see bonds used as a force to bring compliance. A bond usually is to back up the action that needs to happen. And in my world, if I have a bond, it's in case you don't fulfill your duty and I have to go pay someone else to do it for you. We had not used those bonds, the landscaping bonds, that way. We have never taken someone's bond and sent a landscaper in and landscaped your property for you because you didn't do it. And so I think it's probably not appropriate to use bonds for that. It sounds to me like the council and the planning commission want something that keeps the momentum to have it landscaped properly, and then it just happens. But there needs to be some sort of pressure to get it done in the timeline that the permit says. So what you don't want to see is a developer say, "I promise I'll do this," and then it never happens. And then you say, "You said you were going to landscape it like this. You showed us these plans." "I never intended to. I paid someone to make me the plans. Never intended to do that. Not going to. We're done talking about this." And that's where the bond was probably improperly chosen, because the city was never going to go in and put plants on your property for you. That never happened. And so whatever mechanism that aids to compliance needs to not be onerous, but it needs to have enough pressure, if you will, that the property owner says, "This is landscaping, like I said I was going to, is the easiest path." And that's because that's all that everyone's looking for, is compliance, right? The plan was approved, the plan meets the code, the plan got done, and the community is better for it. And then there's not this catch-22 where it's never finished, and then you have a vehicle that, as in a bond, that it can't be released because no one knows what is complete. Living in the world of occupation, I don't get a certificate of occupancy in a building until everything is checked off. Fire marshal comes through, the inspections are done. Did I finish? What's my checklist? Let me have my money. I need to be done. And that's that natural pressure. If I didn't, in a building contract, have those gates, then it would drag on, and no one would be satisfied with the completion date. So that's all I wanted to say, was just that, no one wants to hold the money and not see a complete project. The goal is to have a process that's nice and smooth. Everyone knows what they need to do, and the easiest path is the compliant path, and you never bump into the side rails very often.
Yes, please.
So I just want to give my experience. I've had the pleasure of working with people that have just thrown up their hands and just said the hell with it. It comes back to our initial presentation of the process when we accept that bond, and then being very consistent, like he said, in a building, you check, 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 check. What has happened over the years is that those rules change. And so people who are developing, or they're going to do their landscape plan, they have to bring back a inspection report that says they've completed it. And then we go out there, and if there's one plant that's not 2 feet tall, we deny it. So there's absolutely no flexibility right now in our code to allow us to even get them out of our system. And that's because our process has become very subjective, and the expectation by the one that has the bond doesn't know clearly what we're asking for. And so that's been my experience, is trying to figure out how we get to that end result where they can have a bond release and then come back and invest more and do more development in the city. And sometimes it's as simple as, I have rock in my island and you want me to have mulch. And for 22 months, I've been waiting for us to have a conversation.
Eric?
If I could make one more comment, kind of in the general discussion that you had about what you think about landscaping and your preferences on it. One thing I would keep in mind is kind of the natural progression of development, right? So you have completely undeveloped parcel, and you would call it natural, right? And that has an intrinsic value to the public. You look at it as a certain value ranking. So then development happens and it's disturbed. We have the built environment now that's for humans. And so we know that a parking lot is paved is far more useful to a human with a vehicle than an unpaved, pothole-ridden, So we say, hey, that's really useful for us. Let's do this. So then the question for the decision makers is, how far do you want to go from completely undeveloped to, there's heavy civil work, the roads are built and stuff. Most people would say, let's bring a little bit of nature back into that parcel, right? And so that's your decision. How much nature needs to come back into that parcel? And you're gonna run into two controlling factors: little parcels that don't have much space, and the owner wants to have as many people come to it as possible. So that pressure is going to be like a coffee shop. Pressure is going to be, I'm not that big. I want as many people to come through. Every time you make me plant a plant, I lose people space, and that's that push and pull. How much people space do I get to keep? And how much natural space do I have to put back? I cleared everything, and now I've got to put something back. And then what you see in the complexity of the current code is trying to build a little biosphere again, right? So you look at the completely untouched natural space. It's got all these different species, different sizes, different ages, and it's got diversity. And so you see an artificial biosphere recreated, and that's super complicated because we didn't plant any of the natural landscape. Right? So as soon as we try to become a biosphere builder, then we're like, oh my gosh, there's 400 perennials that I have to put in. And so that's that decision that needs to be made is, how close does the urban center need to look like the untouched outside the city? And that's not my perspective. That's not my decision to make. It's the decision makers. But as you know, the more complex it gets, the harder it is to meet. And then we still are going to use it, right? So we got to think about snow storage. We got to think about drainage. We got to think about how much work it'll take to make it look really good again. And then you also, back to the native plants, there is a desire to say, well, if 9 years out of 10 I can grow this plant that's not native here, but it sure is pretty and it sure is really nice during the summer, I think the list needs to include that. That's a cost, right? Because the negative 30 temperatures come through and you lose it all, and then you need to replant or whatever you have to do. And so there's going to be so the last thing I'll say is small properties are going to have a lot of pressure to limit the amount of nature you need to bring back in. And then large properties like warehouses and stuff like that, they're going to say it's really expensive to make 300 parking spaces. Do I have to have that many? And then as you fit in islands and stuff, and I'm thinking of the Walmarts and the Menards and the places where lots of people are coming at the same time, and it's not a high turnover place. And so as you formulate those ratios and think about the ratios, it's really important to think of the size and the scope and the style of people place that you're expecting to fit into those codes.
Madam Mayor, I just want to revise my guarantee comment since I've heard more now and clarify what I was trying to say. May I? Thank you. So I like what Eric said about it, where it's, to me, the guarantee should be a goal to get the person to complete their landscaping job. That's what I want to see in here. And I like what Alina's saying, where it needs to be simplified. Obviously, we can only make it so simple. And I'm just going to use numbers for an example purpose of it. Like you mentioned, where it's, if the landscaping job reaches $200,000 in landscaping, okay, this is when we now require that you have a guarantee. I don't know what the percentage of that would be, but that's what I'm thinking in this. And then that way it kind of, like Eric was saying, causes them to go, the easiest way to get my money is to complete my landscaping job. That's what I think I need to see here. And I guess I
think that's what this does.
Okay.
But I would say, I think what Eric is saying is it doesn't necessarily, that's not, usually when we use bonds, we use them when you have, say, a construction project and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or you're not paying the way you're supposed to pay, right? And so then the bond is there to secure performance. The use of a guarantee in this realm is to incentivize them to comply, and it doesn't necessarily, this instrument, a guarantee, doesn't do it well. I think, or at least, and also is that right? Would you, okay. And also the administration, I think, is saying pretty directly and very articulately that it's not a comfortable fit necessarily either, because it is not how we have chosen, the city has chosen, and I will say not how many cities do not use this guarantee methodology. The guarantee, while used by other municipalities, takes a lot of resources to manage, to memorialize, to record, to enforce, to address of what happens when someone doesn't. When someone doesn't perform, now you have a large sum of money that belongs to them that you are going to go through the process of simply just keeping, which means you're sending notice of noncompliance, which then it's a significant amount of money. So they're going to want to engage in dispute resolution, whether that's with the courts or that's with the city, which then creates a structure, that we're going to need for that. And then if it's too little, maybe it's not getting to that goal. It's not actually incentivizing anyone to do anything if it's not a large enough amount. So it just, it sounds to me after hearing, I'm with you, I mean, after hearing the administration speak, I would advise against a guarantee for Wasilla, because legally speaking, my ears perked up with all kinds of potential pitfalls as we try to use it as incentive. But it's legal. We absolutely can do it. But based on what Eric was saying, and I mean, especially really looking at how that plays out and how comfortable you guys are with it. The one thing I will say is certificates of occupancy, landscaping is tied to occupancy with some provisions that allow some flexibility based on when you're, like if you occupy a building in the middle of the non-growing season, right, then there's some specifications on completing the landscape plan obligations during the next growing season and within a certain period of time. It would be interesting. I would love to try to figure out, because based on what Eric was saying, we really need to think about what happens, because we are in Alaska, and so there's a lot of people who would be occupying a development or property when, before they are completing their landscaping plan, just based on timing. So Eric, can you follow up on, in that scenario, if we had no guarantees, what are some ideas you might have? Not to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. Just
Okay.
through the mayor. I think what I hear is, so typically, if you're not in compliance, then you are typically subject to a fine, right? And the fine is usually enough, either in size or duration, like every day, that it adds up fast enough that you're like, I need to take care of this. And so, since we don't do building inspections, since the occupancy certification comes from the fire marshal, they also are in the same sort of boat where they say, hey, you can't have our approval to be in here in occupancy, as an example, until you meet these standards. And in the same way, if the landscaping is pre-approved and agreed to, and there's language in there about reasonable time to perform, when was it approved, when did the work start, do you have another season? At some point, a period will lapse, and then it would come down to compliance, and code compliance could go out and say, you were given until this time, you haven't done it, now you're at risk of us starting the fines associated with being out of landscape compliance with this permit that you had. But it would have come because of a lapse of timing, not because they didn't have any guarantee down to begin with, if that makes sense. I guess that's the only way I can see it, is the bond is proactive, saying, we've got this money and you won't get it back till you're done. And in the opposite way, the agreement has been made in the permit, and then if it's not met by the agreed timeline, then fines could start to accumulate after that. Then there's no money being withheld, and then that still brings that person back to the table so that it can be dealt with as many other fines have to date, right? So sign ordinance, all that sort of stuff. That is a way to get the party to come and talk to the city to rectify it, and those fines can be mitigated as necessary.
And so that is the system we have in place if we just remove the guarantee. So because we have this certificate of occupancy, which is different than the fire marshal, that's where we will, the city sort of has its own, you've got your landscape plan, you're complying with your land use, your permits, right? So you've gone through these steps, and we give you, you have a right of occupancy from the city, which is use-based, right? And it's not building code based. And then you have enforcement bring up the back end. So I think that if you want to, at least on this next draft, if you want to take the approach Eric is outlining, all we would do is just remove the guarantee. So I think that's really, if I could get a feel for if you guys want to take out the guarantee, or if you want to, the other option is to continue to try to wordsmith it to make it a little more user-friendly and clear.
Okay, Nikki, you're up.
Oh. Well, golly, it's totally changed. I agree with Eric. I think maybe the fine is the way to go. I think we wouldn't have the administration issues, and you're right, holding on to that money and watch them want interest, and who knows what they'll want. So I say let's not do the guaranteer and go with the fines. Any other info did you want from us, Holly?
No, that's it. And so the fines, the way it's set up right now, penalties and fines accrue daily. They're laid out expressly in the code, and therefore all of the various provisions. So that the nice thing about that direction is that's easy for us. So.
Mr. Johnson.
Madam Mayor, I'm really not in favor of the bonds. However, if it's possible to tie the bond to the use permit, for instance, if you had a residential single-family house, there would be no bond requirement. But if you were to have, say, a building, large commercial like a Walmart, that would then require a bond, something like that.
Okay. Mr. Seals.
Madam Mayor, I believe that any of the larger chains, they all have their own landscaping plan. They want their building to look a certain way. I think if we get rid of the bond and go with code enforcement, it will save the city money, time. The public will know where their money is, and if they haven't done something, they'll know what their fine's going to be. And if they want to mitigate the fine and not pay it every day, they'll comply. But your smaller projects, if somebody wants to do landscaping that's above and beyond, I say go for it. But there should be a minimum playing field where mom and pop can afford to comply with the landscaping and parking and snow removal and storm drainage, all that. That's my opinion.
Okay. Mr. Sagel.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the fine. I don't know if it's going to be based on the size of the business, because, you get the little coffee shop, and you fine them the same amount as a larger business, where, and I'm just coming up with arbitrary figures, $75 a day for the coffee shop might hurt, but a larger business, that might be pocket change for them. So I think the fine has to be levied based on the size of the business, and I think that would be better, and maybe have something in there, like somebody mentioned, if they open up during the winter, then based on the landscaping they have to do, okay, by July 25th, you have to, have this completed. And if not, you come back and explain why. I'm not just saying you just start fining them on the 26th, but they have a valid reason why they couldn't complete it, then, some kind of extension.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stafford.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My initial preference was not fines, based on the thinking if a business owner didn't care enough to put in the landscaping that was required, probably wouldn't care enough to bother to pay the fine. But it sounds like requiring a bond or a guarantee up front, it's really sticky legally. So based on the discussion we've had, I guess my opinion is swayed over to a fine for noncompliance. As long as it's spelled out clearly what needs to be done and when it needs to be done by, and at what point the fines will begin. It sounds like having fines in place would be the cleaner way to do it legally.
Okay. All right. I can tell you that we are holding bonds from 2012. And there's no way, as Holly said, in the code to get rid of them or whatever. And if we go back with bonds, I think you're gonna get pushback from the public simply because of the past, how it's been handled. So if you, and I don't know how you would do this, but when they get a permit and bring in their landscaping and whatever, if there's something on there about after the project is completed, you have X number of time, a specific number of days or months, whatever it is, to have the landscaping done. And if you're not gonna have it, if it does not happen in that length of time, then starting on the 30th day, whatever the time limit is, the next day, then we're gonna start fining you X number of dollars. So, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, so I think everybody seems to be on the same page, which I'm just waiting for the one that's gonna just blow the room up, you know, like I just know it's coming, you know, but yeah, so I'm gonna remove the guarantee. The one comment I did hear, I think this was Councilmember Johnson, which was, well, what about bonds for larger projects? So I'm going to preserve that note for the next draft so we can talk about that. Maybe there is an area where you want to look at that. I think that that also reflects one of the comments about what about fines for larger projects or a difference in fines. So we have some legal restrictions on what we can do when we're imposing a fine and penalty. But some of the requirements, so each requirement that we have can have a different fine and penalty or different penalty associated with it. So it would be a different fine. Obviously, we could charge somebody $25 fine for parking in the wrong place and a $300 fine a day for, you know, doing something, you know, building a dangerous building in a location that they're not permitted to do so. So we have flexibility. I'm going to play with that based on those two comments so that we can consider those in the next draft as well. With a focus more on the fines and identifying use landscaping specific to projects or parcels that have the potential to cause more harm and need more mitigation, because that's really what we're looking at. Why are we requiring these landscaping rules? And so the fines should reflect the harm of a violation. We're not really looking at size, right? I think unless someone, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those comments I heard from the commission and council were really more about, this is a huge project that has huge impact, and so we want to make sure the fines reflect the cost of that negative impact with a violation.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The question that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Stafford brought up, would we be able to make the daily fine, for instance, a percentage of the project? So again, you look at the coffee shop and their project is $1,000 in landscaping because it's a very small area. Well, if it's a percentage of that on a daily amount, that ends up being able to be a small amount for them. But when you look at, just using the example, Walmart has a very large landscaping project, so their landscaping amount would be higher, and it would, I mean, I feel like that would make that work. Legally speaking, is that possible?
But legally speaking, no, in the sense that they moved us away from ranges. So we are obligated to have our fee schedule with a specific, fine. But that said, I will think through if there is a way to build a range into the code by separating out maybe some of the regulations. So we get that range by having separate sections or subsections, because we can do a fine that's different for subsection A and subsection B. We don't want to get too patchwork quilty, but I think we may have some room there. I think I might be able to get close to where you're going. But no, we don't have, we used to have the ability to say, you'll pay a fine between $25 and $500. We'll decide what that is going to be later. And that is not how it works any longer, so. All right, so moving on, I think, unless anybody has any questions about this, this was incredibly informative. I feel like we're making a lot of progress. But I do want to try to delve into parking here in a minute. I do think we have what we're looking for from the bodies, so I'm excited about that. And I actually talked about, so I've moved on to slide number 4. 4? Really? That's as far as we've gotten? Okay, I probably should have gone and sat at the table. Oh, no, I mean, I'm on slide number 4 right now, yes. Oh my goodness, okay. It's been a long week. Yeah. Okay, so we're on slide, and I'm Councilmember Johnson, I'm just making sure I call them out. I know I sometimes forget to do that. So this is really just talking about how the code deviates from the Wasilla Municipal Code objectives and goals that were identified today. And what we want to look at is discretion, right? And where is the lack of discretion? And this is the rigidity that everybody was talking about, the lack of clarity. I heard that repeated over and over again in several different arenas. The organization, I think that's just generally reflected in the frustration with user-friendly, the lack of user-friendly provisions. And finally, the other place that I have some concern is contradiction, and that is when the code is governing, for example, trees, and it's creating an exception in one arena, and then you go to another provision, and it's talking about some other aspect of the tree regulation that if you actually flip back 4 pages, you look at them together and they don't make sense. A good example of this is there are very specific regulations regarding where a tree can be and the need for the tree to be outside of to be outside an area where, say, a sidewalk or a driveway could interfere with the root system of the tree, to put it quite simply. But then we have another provision that talks about how we, like what's required for concrete and for those materials that can be used based on the need to protect the roots of the tree. So when I read that as a lawyer, it seems we've worked really hard to protect the tree from the driveway, and now we're working really hard to protect the driveway from the tree. And it creates, but we've already protected the tree from the driveway, so why do we have to spend so much time protecting? And so it doesn't mean that's wrong. It doesn't mean, again, I am not, I'm not an architect, but legally speaking, I want the integrity of each of the code provisions to stand alone. So if we've governed something, we will presume that we governed it well, and we won't necessarily have to govern it again, because I think if you're trying to execute something, like if you're really trying to execute a landscaping plan, that's when it gets really confusing, because those don't make sense to you when you're actually out there buying materials, and I just had to go spend extra and buy this, and get this particular substance to protect something that I spent extra and spent, money getting another particular substance to avoid the situation, then that causes frustration. So we're just going to make sure we have eliminated all of those. So when I say contradictions, I do not mean to say that the code is at all contradictory in a way that would make it unlawful. It's those types of contradictions that I'm worried about. So, all right, so the landscape rollback approach. When we looked to Soldotna, we did that because you do not yet have your update to the comp plan. And I know the administration is working hard to get that process going, and that is going to be a very important process. But this is why we haven't taken a shiny new penny approach. Because if we do that without the land use plan discussions and hearings and all of that wonderful input, we run the risk of doing what council and the commission wanted to avoid, which is basically revamping something and removing things that were there intentionally and had purpose, and doing it and inadvertently over deregulating, right? So we did take the rollback approach, and that meant we took Soldotna. We took a community that has landscaping, but has it in a much more or a much less rigid way. So we have taken, their landscaping plan before was 30 pages, it is now 15. So that, we basically cut it in half just to give you a concept of what you've done. So if the provisions, once we get to the draft ordinance, if the provisions are what council wants to see, we have a substantial reduction in the size of the landscaping plan, which in and of itself sometimes has a benefit, when you're posting it online, when you're distributing it to individuals. 15 pages, and I'm guessing actually now, based on some of these other changes, it'll probably be shorter. So you'll have a document that's a lot easier to give to people, as a resource. I am going to skip now because we did walk through some of the differences in concept, and I'm going to move on to parking, which is slide number 7. See, Jamie, wasn't that smooth? I feel like I've finally. Okay. Anything? No. So before adopting revisions to the city's parking laws, we have to first understand why the city regulates parking and its goals in doing so. And I'm sure this feels familiar from our discussions on landscaping. But so the first thing I want to do, and we can do this in just sort of, we can relax the rules and have individuals throw out their suggestions or raise, it's okay in a work session so long as the mayor and clerk agree to have that be more informal, if that's easier. But what I really want to understand is why. Why do we regulate parking in Wasilla? What's our goals?
Mr. Stafford.
I guess it would be, my thought is if we, in requiring minimum parking spaces for a particular business, it prevents that business's customers, if there's not enough parking, from taking another business's parking up next door. And so just kind of a way to level the playing field and make it fair for everybody, is why I would support it. But I know the trend has been in a lot of places rolling them back, and just kind of letting the situation sort itself out. I don't know that I've settled on a side yet as far as which is the best way to go. I see the pros and cons of both sides at this point, and I don't think I have a solid stand on which way I would lean.
Okay. Melvin.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what he just said. I'm kind of on the fence with this. I think we need more parking. I'll use downtown as an example. Probably shouldn't say this, but I parked at the post office to go somewhere else, and I parked somewhere else to go to the post office, and you name the place, I parked there to go somewhere else. So I think something needs to be done. I'm just not real sure what that solution is, because if you just do like a lot of cities have an area where you just have like municipal parking, well, where you gonna put it, we're gonna draw businesses out of a hat and say, okay, we're bulldozing your lot.
Yeah, that'll go over big.
Yeah, so I don't know how this can be tackled.
Mr. Seals.
Well, I go back to my mantra of the less regulation, the better. So I'm still on the fence as far as the exact details of parking, but the less regulation is going to work out better. I do the same thing as Melvin does. If I need to park at the post office to go across the street, and there's no parking across the street, that's where I'm gonna park. Is the city interested in building a parking garage or underground parking? Thank you.
Talk to the citizens and we'll see. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I think less regulation is probably better. However, until we really know what our downtown plan with respect to Main Street is going to look like and we have a comprehensive plan, I'm not sure we can really tackle a lot of detailed regulation that we could add into the current code. So I'm like everybody else, I'm sort of on the fence here.
Okay. Nikki?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, I personally don't know what the code exactly is for parking. I kind of like the thought of, you know, a business would want a certain amount of parking. They want that. And I would guess the code, they have to have maybe so many handicap parking spots too, do they? Or, yeah. And, you know, some businesses might just need less than others. And that's why I'm not really sure either. I almost think, you know, hey, I'm a busy business. You know, I have people in and out constantly. I need more parking. I can handle, you know, a lot of customers. I might be a barber that I have one chair. Well, you know what? I'm only going to schedule one person at a time. So that's why I just don't know. It's almost like it's their decision. How many parking spots do you need? Well, you know what? Get that many. That's, yeah.
Okay. Elena?
I agree with them. Less is more for sure. I like the idea of shared parking. I really think that there's pros and cons to every kind of parking style you have, and you have to weigh those what's best for the city, right? When you look at that shared parking, you're looking at if the post office is open during business hours, the parking lot's full, right? But when the post office is closed and there's something happening at the library at night that's drawing more attention, well, I think within our city we're healthy enough to be able to walk from place to place. We should be able to share that parking lot. So I like that idea because, like you said, there's one barber, you know, in that business, but there might be a tattoo parlor next to it and a chiropractor on the other side of it. I don't see why we have to prioritize. I get one parking spot, you get 5, you get 7. We share it. If someone has to walk a little bit farther within our city, I think we're okay. But I really do like that idea. And I think a lot of the cities our size are turning to that shared parking because where are we? We can't tear down a business, you guys, to say we want a parking garage. We're just not there yet. And so I think the shared part really kind of opens the door that I even look at it as Fred Meyer's. When the parking lot's full or empty, I'm still parking farther out, right? We all want the shopping cart to be right there for us, but sometimes you have to go get your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's a give and take, and I think for sure, like I said, I agree. There's pros and cons on both sides, but I really like that idea.
Okay, Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I like the shared parking idea, and Eric and I were actually just discussing, we have a local business owner that's willing to give up some of his own property to create public parking because he knows in the long term it benefits him because he's losing some parking due to the couplet plan. So I think the shared parking is a wonderful idea. I think something that Nikki was trying to get at was kind of creating a minimum and maximum parking for businesses to say, hey, you do need a minimum for, I don't know how we would calculate it exactly. That is a little bit beyond my understanding. Though creating a minimum of, you need to have at least this amount of parking. But having a maximum where we don't have somebody going, well, I think I'm going to be super busy. And so they just go out and create too much parking lot. Kind of like, I mean, from what Mr. Graham said a while back was, you know, Fred Meyer wanted more parking when they originally submitted their plan. So giving the business the freedom to have more parking if they feel like it, but then you have a less busy business that doesn't need that parking, so they can say, well, I'm going to scale back and put more, my minimum amount of parking needed. And so that would be where we move away from the, you must have X amount per Y amount. It's a, you must have between X and Y per Z amount, whatever it is. It gives you that range to work with, and then the business owner can decide, because again, maybe they have shared parking nearby and they go, I don't need to create this amount of parking because there's other parking that's going to be available in that area. I think that'd be the good way to look at it. And I think that's what I heard from some of the other people as well. And that allows for less regulation, because even though we're putting ranges on it, it's saying we're letting you kind of pick within here with what you want.
Wasilla is very unique because our downtown lots are really small. So with that, how you going to regulate a tiny space that wants to have a business, or there is already a business there? You know, I think when you start trying to regulate that, you get in trouble. And as far as I'm concerned, having had a business on Main Street, you know, when my people was coming, they'd park wherever, because it didn't take long for that parking lot to get full, like 3 cars, 4 cars, they'd park wherever. And today, if I go to a business in downtown, I'll go park in Car's parking lot and walk over, or wherever I park, you know. And if you have a handicapped person or whatever, then you're going to drive up and let them out. Or if they're driving, then they will try to get to the closest handicap parking that there is to whatever business they're going to. Eric.
I just want to chime in and kind of give perspective on the public side of transportation into downtown, right? So we want people to come downtown. There's almost no housing downtown. I would not consider it walkable. And so everyone is going to drive from somewhere, and we want you to come so we know you need to park, because we don't have pocket cars yet, you know, like the Jetsons that folds up and goes in your pocket. If we ever, you see a lot of cities that say, we want to be walkable, cars are bad, tough beans, figure out how to go from the outside of town in, and that's just the way it works. That's not what I see the Wasilla doing, right? We have big trucks, we have big families, we want to come downtown, parking's always going to be critical. And so there's going to be, I think there's going to be pressure to have a minimum amount of regulation which says buildings can't be too close to the right of way with our setbacks and stuff, right? Because you have to have some parking. If you're a tax preparer, you don't have that many people at once. If you're a donut shop or a fast food, you've got people every minute, right? And so we can't fit all fast foods, and we don't have a vibrant downtown if they're all tax people. And so there's got to be that mix. And so to have that balance, to get people to come down and do multiple things. So when you're down here, I want to make sure my sidewalks are clear of snow for you to walk between businesses. I don't want you to have to get in your vehicle and drive to 3 different parking lots. So to kind of figure out, that's where the downtown master plan comes in, right? Get you down into the core and then figure out how to let you do all the things you want to do in one convenient trip. People are super good at figuring out what's convenient. But if you've got a great business that has horrible parking, that's not good for the community. And it's that catch-22, because a lot of businesses don't own their buildings. And so they start off like, please let me make it through this. Then they start to excel, and then they're impacting, like Chepo's, for instance. Chepo's blew up, and we were asking them not to park on the frontage road, and they have a lot of parking. And so we're not frustrated that they're doing well, but we have this management deal where we're like, you can't block entrances? Can you have the patrons park in the back? That sort of thing. And so they can't pick up their building and move it. And so that's where a little structure is required to say, that small parcel probably is not suited the best for a business that has a huge number of visitors, patrons. And so that's where we need to be, and that's where we need the plan, whatever the plan is, to be up front with the growing business person so they can make that educated decision and say, I got 2 parcels I'm really interested in. City, can I have any more parking? No, that one's too small. That's as big as we can go. Okay, I think I'm going to do really well. I want to go with the parcel that fits my business better. And that's where the decision makers make that feeling and say, who's our design customer? What, are we going to have bigger parking spots? We're going to have all these compacts that no one can fit in, so then they don't park properly anyway. That sort of like, how would I describe that? The feel, right? What does it feel like to come downtown Wasilla? Do you feel like you can be efficient, and is your activity making the place more vibrant? Or did we not plan properly and only people with Mini Coopers have comfort parking in downtown?
So on that problem though, I always look to think that Chepo's, just that as an example, there is a church right down the road, walking distance, that is empty, other than on Sunday most days, right, and a few nights of the week. But it's the fact that if I was the business owner of Chepo's, I would be knocking on that church and going, hey, what can we do? And that's not even involving the city, but that would be solving the problem that the city has come to me with. So I feel like a lot of business owners are going to work out those little tiny kinks to not cause a burden to the city. You know what I mean? I would think and hope, and I think even the city saying that and saying, hey, have you reached out? Have you, to those other locations that are around them that could help them out with parking? And I don't want to put it on the record, but I mean, there's Lowe's right there. You'd say, but you could park at Lowe's and walk. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. I really do believe sharing is caring, for sure.
So from everything I've heard, this one is a little stickier, but I'm just going to give you my feel, and then we can work back from there. My feel is that predominantly this waits till the comp plan, but a provision that allows for sharing agreements that can be used towards requirements is not so significant that it would have to wait for the comp plan, because I think you're still getting, so instead of moving away from X spaces per, as Councilmember Crofton was saying, like right now what we have, actually, let me step back, because I know some were saying, what exactly do we do? We do a lot with parking, but the biggest thing that we do is we have a table in which we identify how many spaces are required for specific uses. So for an adult retirement housing, 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit is required. For bed and breakfast, it's 1 per guest room. For warehouses, aircraft hangars, storage and wholesale business, it's 1 per each 1,000 square foot of gross floors area, right? So that's how we have it laid out right now, which is very rigid. I mean, you're looking at, and I do think sometimes causes consternation, especially when you have businesses that are in commercial parcels that have more than one business, right? That's when it gets very restrictive, because they may be, they planned for meeting their requirements for a certain type of business and now have added another type of business, and maybe they're falling short. So it sounds to me, first of all, the update of the comprehensive plan when it comes to parking, given the growth of Wasilla and the changes within the boundaries of Wasilla, is essential. Like, I am not saying that your code should be unchanged. I'm just saying I hear so many comments from administration and from council and commission members that sound a lot like, Well, we definitely don't want to get rid of parking requirements. We need them here. We drive, and we need people to be able to drive to the places. But we definitely don't want to create a concrete, wasteland. We want to progress, but it's hard to have that conversation outside of projections regarding your growth, the numbers, how these businesses use their parking. That isn't just rhetorical. I feel like there's a lot of comments coming in where it's like, well, I use the parking lot over here, or I think this parking lot's busy, and then someone else being like, actually, I think this parking lot's empty. And so all of that says to me, this is a conversation, a greater conversation with your community and through the comp plan process, so you have the tools to look forward 30 years so that your parking requirements match those goals and objectives. So I that would be my first thought. That said, I think that we can develop a sharing provision for your consideration when we look at the draft ordinance, because I heard a lot of you refer to some aspect of sharing, and that might alleviate some of the rigidity, the frustrations from that. And I'm just going to ask the administration what they think of that, and you as well. I just want to get the feedback on that approach.
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying. We had a meeting with an applicant today that has a very large development plan, and will have a lot of people using their facility. And so they are in the code today, and I think rightfully so, they're going to have to do a traffic study. And so there is a whole science behind traffic modeling, traffic studies, that tends to live in the DOT world, the federal highways world. But I'll give you an example. So we have an area over by Home Depot, the Steam Commons area, that was developed a little at a time, and it involved DOT because of that light there. And the developer was told, you're going to have to do a traffic study. And the developer said, oh, no, we'll never garner that much traffic. Knowing full well that they would, and they, please God, give me enough traffic. But they don't want to pay for the improvements that come with the actual honest traffic count. So you go to Steam Commons now, and it's hard to get into. And then we get phone calls as the city saying, you're not maintaining that road very well. And I'd say, that's actually not my road. Because the deflated traffic study, which cost less at that time, said, nah, you don't have to do that much. And, oh, yes, you can take a left into the gas station. That road was not designed for double trailer tankers to deliver gas. So there's these penny-wise, pound-foolish decisions that can be made if we don't just take a reasonable, holistic look and say, business entity, we have a feeling from our tables that your business model will be successful, and you will probably garner a number of trips per hour, and those trips per hour affect everyone around you. And so you need to be honest about what is probable for the impacts to your neighbors, because if you think you're going to share, but that one business has such a high turnover rate or something, then the businesses around them would say, I didn't know it'd be that bad. It's really bad. And we can get closer with some reasonable numbers. So I am a fan of a reasonable table saying, if you're in this, it doesn't need to be, so prescriptive it's 100 steps or it's 100 lines, but some general understandings of that tax preparers are not the same as fast food, as the same as a box store, as the same as a gas station, for instance. But there should be a starting point to say, we can put you in a few boxes as a business entity and say, this is where we're going to start. And then there should be probably some pressure relief valves that say, that proposal that you have, that business model, maybe it's brand new, right? Like, so until COVID, picking up your groceries from a delivery person at a store was not normal, right? And so we see Fred Meyer's and Safeway and Walmart figure out how to do that with their own infrastructure. What door are they going to come out? Are you going to get run over at Fred Meyer's? Do I have to put up my own blinky red lights so that you can get your delivery bags, right? They had to figure that out because they had to react immediately for that. We had no code provision for door-side delivery. So they figured out because they know how to survive. If we were to move ahead with another huge big box store, what would they bring to the table? Would they say, we learned that we need this or that? And so I think they're probably, whatever the code is, it should probably have a relief valve in there where you can have some technical review and discuss those nuances. But if you're not complicated like that, then like Elena said, it should be straightforward enough that the simple use cases don't require a PhD to figure out what we need to do. But we also don't lose some nuanced control when something unusual comes through, like another facility that's going to garner 300 trips per hour because of how big it is. Does that make any sense? I don't know.
So that's also really helpful because those traffic studies, the congestion and traffic, is a really important consideration. That's hard to do outside the comprehensive plan or land use plan process. You know, how we, even if at least initially we're looking at just sort of a land use plan component of the comp plan, you know, I still think that you'll get those answers. And this section of your code, your parking, is clear. It's not, I can see, you see the points where you need a pressure valve. You can see them, you know, or at least I think I can see them when I read the code. Sharing is one option. And a lot of times with a sharing agreement, there's a benefit because they pay for it. You know, they're sharing, they're paying for a certain price that's less than building their own additional parking for that use and that exclusive use during a period of time. And the city doesn't have to negotiate that, or, you know, they just simply are, I think they're looking at the sharing. So if we draft a sharing agreement provision, I mean, and I have not drafted one of these before, I'll be honest, this is sort of a new area, but I'm one of the things that I'll be looking for is, do we require exclusivity? You know, are we requiring them in order for it to qualify to alleviate our parking? Do the terms of the agreement have to allow for exclusive use during a time period? Because if it's, or are we going to build in some trust that they are weighing their capacity, both of them, and that they're, you know, and so there'll still be questions. If I bring that back to you, we're going to have a discussion, probably things I haven't thought of because I have not drafted one of those before. The other topics, and I'm just going to run through them a little bit, you know, a lot of material on them, but I just want you to be thinking about them. I think, unless, and again, when I tell you I think this is a comp plan topic, it is your authority to tell me it is not, and we will be dealing with it now, just so you know. It is not, my role is, I'm overstepping if I were to tell you that. You are, as the commission and the council, you can change this right now however you want to, you know. So this is just my recommendation and feel based on your comments. So we can go any direction that fits the joint body.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you. It's funny you talked about the comp plan because I had already written down part of what I said about having a minimum maximum parking situation was I can't really make a determination without knowing what the high amount of car traffic is, what the low amount, what the average is, because that's really what's going to determine it. I mean, when our current parking chart, what was that based off of? Is one of my questions. Like, when did we originally create that and set that basis? And it's probably based on data we had however long ago, whenever we set that. So I think, in my opinion, waiting till that comp plan comes up would be a good way to deal with the updating of the chart, I would say. And it sounds like we kind of are on the same page where, like you said, it's too rigid if you say it's one per this. We should have a range per this, which gives that a little bit more freedom. I do really like the idea of adding that shared provision on there. I would like to see that. I think it's a good way to at least say, hey, public, hey, businesses, we understand we have a parking problem. Here's something we are trying to do to help alleviate the problem in the interim. But for us to truly do the best job at solving your problem, we really do need to get this comp plan done before we can address this problem, because those numbers could be way off if we were to try and take a jab at it right now, I think is my thought on it. So I'd like to see that provision.
Okay. So the other provision that kind of couples with that is an Anchorage adopted this, and unfortunately it became effective January of this year, so we haven't been able to see what that looks like, but they have a provision that incentivizes alternative programs. So they, well, first of all, let's just start with what they did, because they just eliminated parking requirements in the city of Anchorage, or municipality of Anchorage. So that was one step. Now, but if you look at Anchorage and the amount of parking and, you know, the amount of spaces they have, it's different. It's not the same as Wasilla. You don't have the same parcel sizes. So I am not saying that, you know, that they necessarily did something that will work for the city, but it is something we have now to look at. They did a good job, in my opinion, with that legislation. I thought that it was clean, and they put a lot of work into analyzing it. And so, you know, so for that reason, there's a bunch of resources there for us, which is great. They are so different than Wasilla that I'm not sure it'll ever be anything you could pick up wholesale even after the comp plan. But they do have one of the alternative programs that, so they allow you to, you know, and well, anyway, it is a rideshare program. So it's similar to a share agreement. It's allowing less spaces if you have a certain amount of spaces for rideshare for your employees, for example, and you support that program. So there's a bunch of other things. They also have, you know, you pay free bus passes. I'm not sure how that would alleviate here, how that would work in Wasilla. I'm not sure what your public transportation use is, you know, but these concepts, these options, they're all in your materials. But I do think they are most appropriate in the realm of a comp plan discussion. But the two that, so I will put the sharing provision. The question I have is, there are about 3 or 4 other alternatives that can exist alongside your code as written. Do you want me to put those in, or do you want to just put in the sharing provision for now? Or do you want me to put those other options in? I mean, Anchorage spends a lot of time talking about bicycle, you know, as a form of bicyclists, and making sure that they have the support and the parking requirements. They apply a lot of new parking requirements for cyclists. And so I think that's a comp plan discussion. I mean, that would be my thought, because I think it matters how many cyclists you have, you know, using your facilities and using that as a mode of transportation, and how that works on the actual roads, and how encouraging it in one particular area, is that even safe based on how that particular road is used, all non-lawyer questions, right? So all of those things, I will make sure that you have those materials, but my thought is, from what I am hearing, I'm going to draft a sharing provision, and we will go through and wordsmith this section just to make sure it's clean, but it is already a very clean provision. So that is the direction I'm going to take, unless I hear something from somebody that asks for a different direction. Okay, all right. So that's really, you have a ton of materials. You have a lot of documents or handouts that were designed to help process all of this information as we move forward. I just want to draw your attention. One of them is understanding the laws and how the interplay between them. It's important to keep that one on hand. So you had, we handed out a supplemental material packet, and that's really just a collection of those handouts. I would just ask you to, most of them are 1 to maybe 2 pages. And they are specific. One deals with parking, the perils of parking, and sort of talks about parking reform. Another one deals with understanding the laws and how they fit together. This is important because it really talks about the difference between regulating use and regulating building safety and codes and platting, and so what the borough's role is versus the city's role, versus the state's role. And one of the reasons why I want you to have that one on hand and make sure you read it before the next segment is we're going to start talking about the use chart. And when you're making a decision whether or not you want to eliminate some of the permitting requirements for a use, I would call them, we'll just call them for now, like blatant uses within a zoning district. For example, building a residence in the residential zone, right? So the question, right now, we are eliminating in a lot of ways this permitting process we proposed an elimination. We need to really understand what that means, because I do think there is a regulation for the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation that requires residences or residential property to meet the code provisions in the Uniform Residence Code, building code. And so that is there, and it is not qualified, but it is in a regulation. So one of the things that we can do is simply require that be met, that regulation be, that property owners comply with that for the construction of residential projects in the city. Which again, I think it may arguably apply anyway, but by making that clear, then you have your floor. You are ensuring that there is a residence building code in play. The borough does regulate and impose compliance with building codes and for commercial buildings, for multiple unit dwellings, and so that's already done. And the state does, and the borough implements the state's authority on some of the fire code provisions. So building in the city of Wasilla does not necessarily, it is not implicated by regulating the use. So we're talking about planning, and the borough deals with building, and there is this hole we'll talk about for residential properties. And then the other part is understanding platting and how platting aligns with and how it interplays with permitting. And so we're going to talk about all of that. Just read it's like, well, that one might be like 6 pages, but I don't think it's very long. So, and on that, I think that is the majority of I think that is everything that we were going to talk about today, but I'm going to scan the slides a little bit here because we moved pretty organically through parking, which means I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so for segment 4, I think I gave you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing, but also your short-term rental provision. That's where you want to put your attention. You'll get your packet materials, but that's what we're going to be looking at. And the general use restrictions. So that's what's coming. The other thing that will happen is in segment 4, I will most likely, with the mayor's and clerk's support, be asking you to consider another segment so that we can really pay attention to the language and how we're communicating it. So I just don't want you to throw things at me when that comes up in segment 4. So, and
Throw 'em now.
yeah, I know. Sorry. Mayor, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to exit committee of the whole?
Madam Mayor, I had one more question for the attorney before we do that.
Better ask fast.
So there was quite a few items in here I had some questions on. Would you just like an email of what those are later on?
That is great. Email is a great way to do that, and I think you do that through the clerk, correct,
Yep.
Jamie? Yes, okay.
Perfect.
And so that allows us to memorialize them and keep them straight too, because we have some of the members have given us sort of feedback and questions, and we kind of keep those all together so that the next draft has, addresses everything.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to exit committee of the whole.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Crafton and seconded by Commission Member Seals to exit committee of the whole. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, we are now out of the committee of the whole. The time is 7:54. There's no new business. We're on to audience comments. It's a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. There's not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to the administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Is there anyone present who would like to address the city council? If so, please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name. Comments are limited to 3 minutes.
No, I'm not gonna give you anything crazy. Is this on right now?
No.
Okay. So like
Now
on
it
the
is.
screen? Okay, I just wanted to say, my name is Dr. James Martin, and I am part of the Main Street property owners. I just want to thank that Holly did an incredible job here today. I just want to say that. And I think everybody was very thoughtful and very intelligent, and I appreciated what everybody said. As a property owner, I just appreciate what you guys are doing. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address the council at this time? Seeing no one, we will close audience comment, bring it back to the dais. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just meeting schedule, next regular meeting for City Council is 2/26, and then we'll follow with our follow-up joint meeting. Next joint meeting, 2/28. And City Hall is closed this coming Monday for President's Day. So we'll see you all on the 26th, City Council.
Madam Attorney.
No comment. Oh, happy Valentine's Day.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you all.
Councilmember Rubio.
Thank you, Holly. The presentation was awesome. I really like the direction that we're going with all of this, and so it really does make me happy. I want to throw my arms up and be like, yes, we're going to get there. I promise. Also, to everybody, happy Valentine's. Thanks for spending it with us, right?
Yeah. Councilmember Velock.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do want to thank Holly. And yeah, we're definitely heading the right direction. This will be good. I think it'll help our economic development. That's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Crafton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Of course, happy Valentine's Day, and just thank you for your people that decided to show up tonight and stick through this one. I know these are the meetings that are really hard to sit through. I've been on your side before, so I understand how that is. I had one question for our clerk. I thought I saw that we had already scheduled a 5th special meeting for this.
Into March.
Into March,
But
okay.
If I may,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, that is into March, but let's hold off on that one.
Okay.
Until we regroup with the city attorney. So we'll be in touch, and then, of course, on our master meeting calendar, any changes show up there immediately for the public, so.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy and
Nope.
didn't see.
No.
Hey. So it sounds like, yeah, we're prepared for that one. So awesome. Thank you all for being here tonight. It was a wonderful meeting. Of course, thank you, Holly, as well, for this lovely presentation. I think you've presented it very, very well. And it is working its way down to a 3rd grade level.
Commissioner Sajel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I just want to thank again the city attorney for all the hard work on this. I don't envy you, but glad you're doing it, not me. And also thanks to the staff, especially Eric, with some of the comments he made. They're really good and really thoughtful. And thanking everybody for their comments, and we'll get to the end soon.
Commissioner Seals.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Said everything I was going to say. But I really appreciate the comments that Eric Schwal brought to the table tonight. It's a different level of insight that a lot of us don't have, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, Holly, for your work.
Commissioner Stafford.
Yeah, again, thank you to Holly for all the work that you and your team have put into this, and I think we're making progress.
Okay, thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody. Thank you for spending it with us. I do like the way that we are diving into this and simplifying it. And I mean, it don't need to be rocket science. You don't need to have to hire an attorney to explain to you what the code says. So, and I think Holly is bringing it down to our 3rd grade level. till we can all understand it. So thank you, Holly, for all the hard work. And to the staff, appreciate it. Eric, thanks for your wise comments. So, anyway, if there's nothing else to come before the council tonight, we will adjourn at 8 p.m.
Hey, Mayor, do we have Eric here next time too?
Oh,